Hello, I'm Amy. I am a formally trained draper, pattern maker, seamstress. I've worked in every possible job there is in the costume department for theater, and I've worked at every level of theater from the smallest community theater to biggest Broadway costume shops. I primarily focus on draping. That's what I prefer to do over flat patterning, but I can do both. And I'm going to teach you draping. This video is going to be the very, very start of learning how to drape. It's a bodice body block, and that's really the first thing you learn because it teaches you all the fundamentals and the shape of the body and what the fabric should look like. And then I will teach you how to transfer what you drape on the form to paper, and then how to true it up and make it perfect so that you can then go ahead and cut out your fabric and sew something. So we'll go step by step through draping to flat pattern, and I'll teach you any tricks or tips I can think of along the way. Let's get started. Okay, so first things first, you need a dress form, obviously. We're not basing this on anyone's measurements today, so you're just gonna get any old form just to learn on. And you're gonna get a piece of muslin. Now I'm trying to figure out which way I'd rip this muslin. So you wanna start, that way. You wanna start with the selvage, which is the outside edge of the fabric. That's the grain line. That's the way that fabric runs, the grain line. So it's as long as the fabric is. That's the grain line, and that's important to know. Fabric will typically rip when you want to rip it. It'll rip on grain or close to cross grain, and that's a lot easier than cutting a straight line. So I just did a little snip of the fabric and I ripped it along, and that's how we got here. So you want to start with that on center front. There usually is a seam on a dress form for center front, and that's obviously helpful. So you want to leave a little bit of space up there, probably 4 or 5 inches up at the neck, and you want to pin in right at that cross where the neck seam meets the center front seam. So you'll just pin and pin away in the opposite direction because that holds it. You know, when I pull it this way, which is the way I'm going to drape, it won't pull the pin out. That's the point. So then you just do that all along. Do it loosely. Don't pull it too tight. That'll warp it. You really want it to be as flat as possible. And put as many as you feel like you need, whatever you feel comfortable. Some people pin a lot, some people don't. Go all the way down. You can go to the waist or a little bit past. That helps hold it in place a little bit better. You just go like an inch or 2 past. Okay, now that you have that pinned straight down, then you want to kind of pull it straight across to the shoulder. And then you want to stick a little pin in that shoulder seam at the top. Now you see how this, you can't push it all the way, it bunches like this. I don't know if you can see that. See, it's folding, you gotta clip that. I have snips, I swear, and little tiny scissors. I just also have 3 small children, and I don't know where they are right now. The scissors, not the children. So you wanna kinda just cut some of that excess away because it's in your way. And then you should be able to smooth it up from the shoulder to that corner. The corner at the base of the neck. And then you're going to want to clip down close to the neck seam. See, so that lays flat there. Because that's a curve, and curves don't lay flat with fabric. You have to clip it to make it fit. Because you won't have all this excess when you're sewing a garment. It won't be there. Okay. So now you want to go from across the bust, just at the top of the armhole, and put a pin there. And you can cut all this extra away as well. I cut my fabric a bit bigger than it needed to be. You always want to be safe than sorry. So just cut all this away because you don't need it. It's in the way. Okay. Now you're going to put in 2 darts, the bust dart on the side and then the under bust dart going straight down. Typically you want those to be pretty close to each other in size. So you just kind of do this by feel. It'll obviously vary on each dress form depending on the size of it. You want them to go, this is kind of like where the art form of draping comes in. You want them to go so that they meet the side seam here at a right angle, as close to a right angle as you can get. And you also want the amount to be pretty similar to the bottom. So that's pretty close. So I'm going to go ahead and pin that. And you pin that as much as you need to. You obviously want it to go to the bust, but not to the bust point. Because then, well, it's obvious if you saw it. You don't want to accentuate nipples or have nipples in the garment, you know. Just pin that. And then you kind of, to keep the grain in the right way, so you hold that, you just go straight down and pin at the waist, the side seam. Then you'll come over here and you'll pin that. Sometimes you have to work it a little bit. The fabric is wrinkled or bunches up. You have to have finesse when you do this. And we'll definitely look it over and correct anything that's wonky when we do the truing of the pattern. So you'll pin that. Actually, you know what? I think it works better this way. Okay. You want to keep them as straight as possible. And then see, this is pulling. That's because that goes on too long. So you want to trim that up. So we'll trim down the side seam. And then trim below the waist. You want to kind of smooth out anything that might be a little weird. Because the more you clip on curves, the flatter everything lays. Now there should be quite a bit of ease in an armhole, so a little bit of this is okay. But if you can pull some of it down, you do. Overall, that looks pretty good. So now what you do is you get a pencil and you kind of draw in the seam lines. You can feel it. You want to do all the crosses, especially wherever there's a corner of where the edge of the one seam matches another seam and there's a corner like this. You really want to make sure that those are shown. And then you just kind of do little dashes. This is another corner, so you really cross that. Now this dress form, the shoulders extend a little bit past the armhole, so you kind of just got to eyeball that, but we can clean that up when we pattern. Here's the side seam. On the dart especially, you want to make sure that that's a nice good line. Waist and side seam, make sure that cross is good. Here's another dart. And you want to draw that line too. So there's a line right there where the dart meets up. And the best way to do this with darts is you want to make sure you have a pretty long point, and you want to kind of make either lines or dots. So I don't know if you can see that right now. You'll see it when I take it off the form, but when I pull that down, see there's the line on both sides. So you want to kind of do that as much as you can. So you know where the dart meets up. And just kind of pick the point where you think the dart ends. Now center front, you'll mark center front. I like to do a little arrow, that helps. Here's where this one ends. All the way down, waist. Yeah, I got that, okay. All right, so that's the front piece. Now you want to move to the back piece. And you want to make sure you do the same side. So I did this front on the right side of the form. I do not want to do the left back because then they won't match up and that'll be hard to true it. You need it to be the same side. So again, you go to the neck, at center back, and you pin in the opposite direction of where you'll be draping. Just go straight down. It's funny, I always had my pins stuck in my dress form, and then I'd put like 20 in my mouth and hold them like that, and it was, my teachers always told me, like, you're gonna sneeze one day and die. Luckily that never happened, but when I started working for a bridal boutique, they gave me one of these. I don't know if you can see that. So it's like a cushion, a pin cushion on a wristband. So much easier and less dangerous. So I like to use that now. Okay, now same thing. You're gonna go straight out to the shoulder, push it, smooth it up a bit. And the shoulder in the back can sometimes get a dart. I prefer not to do that if you don't have to. So just try to make it as smooth as you can. You can feel the pin from the front, so just use that as a guide. Again, we're going to need to clip that in the neckline. Just trim it for now. And then pin that down. I really have to find my snips. I used to wear them on like tie around my neck, and that made things a lot easier. Smooth along the shoulder. Pin that. And then you can clip that neck. It'll be smooth. There you go. That's nice. Now, you want to go to the underarm. You can feel that pin. Then we can trim all that nonsense away. And then you want to kind of hold this out gently again and just smooth it down the side seam and pin that in place. You want to take note of where it matches up with the dart because you're going to want to mark that notch on it. All right, now in the back, you can see there's all this extra here. All this. This is going to be a dart, just like in the front. It might help you to trim the waist now. Just put that in. I'll trim all that away. The side seam, the waist. Snip that. So much better. And then you can finish pinning the dart. You want it to go pretty straight. See, that's not straight, so I gotta manipulate that a little more. The fabric is folding strangely. Here, let's release that now that I clipped it. Might be able to lay it a little better. That's a bit better. Again, we'll take a look at it when it's on paper. I prefer draping because you can see exactly what's going on. So draping anything at all, any kind of woven bodice, skirts. I love to drape gored skirts. We'll do that in another video. You can see exactly how it's laying. And that's good, but there will always be some things that you're going to need to just fix when you get on paper. Because fabric can warp the more you manipulate it. If you pull too hard, if you clip too far, I mean, things can get wonky. It's really, you have to be pretty gentle. And when you're manipulating the fabric, you do not want to pull, you don't want to push, you really just don't want to tug on it at all. You want to lay it how it wants to lay, essentially, and just feel it out. So it's kind of a creative thing. You just have to feel it and make sure that it's laying properly. And sometimes things are just going to go wrong. They're going to go wrong for everyone. You're going to warp it somehow, and some fabrics warp easier than others. So that's why, of course, you still true everything on paper. All right, so that's done being draped. Now I just have to mark it up with my pencil. I'm going to mark center back with an arrow, neckline real dark, and then at the shoulder, you want to notch that. Armhole. Side seam, waist, and this is where the dart lines up. You want to have that notched well, because you need to know where that dart will attach to the back piece. And then this dart, that's about the end side. Okay, what some people like to do, I do this sometimes, depends what I'm doing, is actually remove anywhere where they're going to attach to the shoulder seam and the side seam. Take those off and pin it together. And sometimes it's easier to mark it that way for some people. So it's really just about you, trial and error. What makes you feel more comfortable, like you've got it right before you take it off the form. Okay. So you can do that. That might make truing a little easier on paper. So yeah, you can see I didn't mark them evenly. So now this one, I have it pinned on the back side, but the front side is a little different. So let's just fix that. Make it a little darker. You can also use different colored pencils. That's up to you. It's how well you know yourself and what you're doing. Once you get more comfortable, you know, you'll have a better idea of the materials you like to use, the tools you like to use to make everything easier for you. And I can do that on the side as well. So to do that, take all those out. You want to pin along the dart. Like that. Yeah. And then you can pin them together on the side seam. Like that. Okay. And then you can do that along all the darts if you want. Just pin along them so that you can take the whole thing off the form and it stays in place just to look at it. I don't prefer to do that. I prefer to just take it off the form. As long as I marked it properly, you shouldn't need that. So you got a gap right here. I'll just color that in. Okay. So you just take it all off the form. As long as you marked everything you need to. Take it off and then we'll see what it looks like before we move to the table to put it on paper. Okay. So this is it when you have it pinned together. If you take those apart, just stick those in there. It's easier. So there you have it. That's your front piece. I don't know if you can see the lines. Yeah, you can see some of those lines on there. And the back piece. Here's my dart. And that's what they look like. So then you go and lay them on paper and trace it out, and we'll do that next. Okay? Okay, we're back. So here I have my two draped pieces. I put them on a piece of paper and I put them the way that they were draped with their side seams together. It's just easier for visual reference. You want to leave a little bit of space because you're going to have to cut and fold and test everything. You smooth it out. I have a cork on my table, so that means that I can pin into it. So you just want to put a few pins in, generally all the corners. To hold the fabric in place well. Both sides. That's my fabric paper ends. There. Once you have that done, you're going to take a pounce wheel, this wonderful, dangerous, medieval torture device looking thing. The spiky ones, while they do hurt when you grab them by accident, they work better than the not spiky ones that you can buy in Joann's. This I'm pretty sure you have to buy online or in like an actual real professional shop. So you want to just roll this into the paper, dig it down, all along all the seams, making sure to really do the corners. Curves you want to take a little slow, make sure you really get it. A little tricky. You want to do the notches too. Darts, obviously. Now, what some places use is tracing paper. So they have colored wax paper underneath. And then they trace everything with the trace wheel, and that transfers colored lines or dots onto your fabric. I do that if I have to. I really, really prefer not to. It kind of tends to get everywhere, the color. So that really annoys me. It gets like on my arms and my clothes, and sometimes it goes through the fabric so that you see it on the good side when you're using actual fabric. So I prefer not to do that, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And it obviously depends where you work, what they prefer to do, because that really dictates the way that you do everything. You know, I've worked in a lot of different places and learned a lot of different methods, and kind of just decided for myself what I like. But that is different for everyone, you know. Some people find that easier. Maybe they're just less sloppy. I don't know. Maybe I'm just I pounce wheel a little too enthusiastically, and that's why my wax paper gets everywhere. I don't know. There's my darts. That everything? Looks like it. Alright, so then you take your pins out. Move your fabric. You might need to reference it, so just keep it close by. And I don't know if you can see that, but there are lines now punched into this. You can like lightly see that. Now it's on my table too. It's the first thing I've done on this table. You're going to recover your table periodically, because for a while it's going to have, you're going to draw on it, you're going to write little notes to yourself on it, and there's going to be a million hole punches through it. So you're going to recover that every now and then, but for now this is fine. Alright, now you're going to take your pencil and your ruler, and you're just going to draw in these lines. Don't Like, obviously some things you want to straighten out because fabric moves. So like this one, for example, so you can see it. This is center back. So the dotted line came in about 1/8 of an inch in the middle. Just the fabric just moved, or I pounced unstraight, but that's why you do this. So you go by with your ruler, you line it up corner to corner, and you draw a straight line. And you want to mark that before you forget that's center back. Do the same thing on the side. If you want to mark side seam and shoulder seam, you can. I'm sure I did when I was learning, so whatever works. SH, SS, drawing my notch. Okay. I like to true as I go because I've, done this so many times that I understand what it needs to look like. But for now, you can just color in exactly what you traced and we'll true it after. Darts you can straighten out. Just go the top point to the bottom where it hits the waist seam. Same thing on the other side. Draw in the waist seam as you traced it, and do the same thing on center front, the front piece. Corner to corner. Now the side seam in the front is going to have a little bit of a shape to it because of the dart, the bust dart. That will come out a little bit from the seam. So you should be fairly straight from the bottom of that dart to the waist. And then again to the armhole. But the part in the middle will stick out a bit to compensate for the loss of fabric. Now darts can curve. Gets a little bit trickier if they do. I prefer that they don't. These look pretty good. They both look like they're going to the same place. Armhole. Shoulder seam. Neck hole. Okay. Now we probably want to separate these, the front from the back. Oh, I didn't mark center front. Center front, side seam, shoulder. Okay, so just, you want to use different scissors than what you used on your fabric. Fabric scissors. These are Ginger dressmaker shears, left hand, because I'm a lefty. I have to buy special scissors. But Ginger dressmaker shears, everyone should have them. And then these are just regular craft scissors. Use those for the paper. Just cut between the pieces to separate them. Okay. Now, you want to check your darts. By doing that, you're going to fold the paper. Fold along one dart line. And a lot of people find that my paper might be too thin for this, but a lot of people find it easy to stick a pin in the table at the dart point. And then you fold one side over to the other side to make sure they line up. And these don't. That's why you do this. So at the waist seam, there's about 3/8 difference. So the waist seam should curve anyway. So you want to I usually pick the lower one. More fabric is always a better idea than less fabric when you're starting off. And that means I had to lower it a little bit at center front, which is fine because that wasn't the right angle anyway. All your seam corners, center front, center back, side seam, shoulder seam, generally speaking, unless it's a stylistic choice, you want those to all be right angles. So right here at the waist, now I drew in that new waistline because of the dart. Now you take your quilter's ruler, see it has all the lines. That's really helpful. You take that and you just pick any line and line it up with the waist seam, and that should make a right angle with the center front. And you want to do that everywhere. Right angles are important. So I just did that here with at the top. You want to do it. So see my neck curved up a little bit. I'm going to go to the lowest part of the neck and just make that a right angle. We'll come back to that. Okay, so I checked that dart. Now that dart is fine. Now we'll check the other dart. Again, you fold along one side of the triangle and you fold it to the other side of the triangle. That one actually does perfectly line up, so that's great. That means that it's good. Now it changes my dart line a little bit. So I'll just fix that. Makes my dart a little wider at the top. We'll come back to that dart. So now we want to go up to the shoulder seam. Those again have to be right angles. If they're not, you have to fix that. So I need to, my neck curve went in a little bit again. So I want to line up the line of my ruler with the shoulder seam, line it up to the innermost curve of the neck, and kind of straighten that into the seam so it's a right angle. Same thing at the armhole. And same thing at the armhole and the side seam. Now that one you usually have to come up a bit, but we're also going to check those curves when we true with this side to the other side. So now let's go to the other side, do that one. To check that dart. Stick your pin in. Hold your dart. It's usually pretty easy to fold along the pounce line because it's perforated. Fold it to the other side of the triangle. It's a little tricky in the back because the dart is so narrow. Just work it the best you can. Okay, so this one is much closer than the front, but it's still not perfect. Again, the right angle also needs to be along the dart line, so it has to be perfectly perpendicular from the dart line. I like to split the difference. Then you just curve that, and that needs to go into a right angle and center back. So I have to raise center back a bit. Just shape it nicely. Side seam a little. That's good. Okay, that's fine. Check our right angles at the top. That's actually right where the neck is. Now we'll do the shoulder seam. I can see that that's coming in a bit at the neck. So I'll fix that. Same thing on the other side. The other side is going out. So let's fix that. We'll fix that armhole in a second. All right, so now we want to check the side seams. So we're going to fold that dart up. You can pin that down if you want. Just right on the inside of the dart. Then you want to fold this side seam on the back piece. fold along that and line up. Yeah, see, this is way different because of the armhole. So we're going to line up the waist. Actually, it kind of splits the difference. I'll line up the dart line, the dart notch right there. So that notch lines up with the dart line. Pin this down. Pin that down. So now the armhole pretty much lines up. My pencil. So we're going to fix this waist, because it should obviously be a nice line from center front to center back. Straight line. That's pretty good. Now this armhole, that obviously does not look right. It's too straight in the back. It doesn't curve in enough. So we'll reshape that in a second, but we're going to do it in a different way. Side seam is good. We'll leave that alone. Take all these pins out. Now we're going to go shoulder to shoulder. So lay that one down. Fold the shoulder. Pin them together. Now my shoulder in the front is way smaller than my shoulder in the back. Now, there usually is some ease in the back, but this is a bit more than it should be. Now I think my neck looks good. It does. So I think I just, because my dress form doesn't have the shoulders marked, I probably just came out way too far on one side than the other. So we're gonna give a little bit of ease. I'll pin that like that. I'm leaving like an eighth, maybe a little bit more than that in the back of the neck. On the shoulder seam, I mean, like in. And then here, pin that. Okay. How wide is this? That's 4. Shoulder usually comes out a bit more, so we'll just bring that to 4.5, which is where the back was. Now, this is a trusty set of tools that everyone should have. It makes your life easier. These are called French curves. They usually come in a set of 3. I think I've seen sets of 5, which are crazy. You pretty much can get everything you need out of a set of 3. There's different sizes, they're different shapes, and essentially they can mimic any curve of the body that you might possibly need. So these are really good for neck holes, armholes, and any other random curves you might do if you're doing something crazy stylistic. So you kind of want to just get this to a place where, so that's your right angle and that's your right angle. So you want to kind of get this to a place where you can do that and it makes a nice curve. That's pretty good. Do the same thing on the back. Sometimes you really got to play with them a little bit to figure it out. But it's very helpful and it saves a lot of time. So now when you look at it, and this is when colored pencils kind of help, you can see the difference in your lines. It's this one. That's a much nicer line. I can even round this one a little bit more. Now, if you were doing this for measurements, you would obviously use your ruler. That's why these are great as well. You can flex them. So you would flex this and make sure that it was the right size with ease. But we're not doing this based on measurements. We're draping. So that's good. Neck hole looks good. Don't need to do anything with that. So pretty much that's it. Your pattern is trued. Everything looks nicer. Everything will sew nice now. You just want to label it a little bit. So typically center front is on fold. Most people don't want to seam down center front. So if you were doing this for the purpose of making a garment, you would draw a line down almost the whole length of it, cross it over. That shows that center front is cut on fold. And then you can, some shops will put the seam allowance in the pattern, so cut around the pattern to leave the seam allowance. That's generally if you're using a tracing wheel and wax paper. If you're going to trace around the pattern and then add the seam allowance, which is what I prefer to do, I write in the seam allowance that I want. So for like center back, if this is a first fitting, you'll generally want 2 inches. And you also need to put the grain line on that, so you're going to make a line parallel to center back, put arrows on either end. That shows where the grain line goes. I put 2 inches there. If it's a first fitting, you'll want 1 inch on the shoulder, 1 inch on the side. Half inch at the waist, because those are curved areas, so if you put more than half an inch, it's not going to lay flat. Half inch at armhole. One, oh, that's half. And then generally you would put a little box. I'll just make this up. I'll say Amy, bodice, front, cut 1 on fold, and then you just put a little box around that. Like that. And that'll tell the cutter, or first hand, whatever you want to call them, bodice back, cut 2. Now if there's something more complicated, you need a lining, then you would say cut 2 lining, cut 2 fabric. You know, if you need interfacing, you put that in. That's just where you put important labels so that if the pieces get separated, you can find them and put them back together easily, because it's right on there. You're not like holding a bunch of bodice pieces and have no idea what goes to what. So after that, you would cut all along the pattern so there's none of this extra nonsense on it. And you would fold them together, put them in an envelope, and send it off to the first hand. Then the first hand would cut it out. If this is a first fitting, you're probably doing it all in muslin. So then they'd cut it out on separate pieces of muslin, sew it together on big stitches. You want big when you're doing a first fitting. And sometimes it's even nice to use like a totally ridiculous color thread so you can see it easily. And then you do your first fitting on that so you can mark it all up. And then you come back and edit your pattern and go from there. So there you have it. That is step-by-step on draping and transferring it to a pattern of a bodice block. That's generally the first step. It teaches you all the basics that you need to know about draping and transferring and truing. We'll do more complicated things and more fun stylistic things. You can see some things behind me that I like, some costumes that I like that I pulled from some of my books. So we can pick some fun things from there, and I'll do videos on those. Thanks for watching. Good luck.